Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. You know, about a year ago, we did a show with Corey Lewandowski of Americans for Prosperity. Since that show was done, a lot has happened. We've had a state election, we've had a national election, we've watched some pretty fierce national legislative fights, we've lived through yet another state legislative session, which also got pretty contentious over some major issues. So to me, it seemed like a great time to check back again with Americans for Prosperity. Now, AFP, which I'll call it from here on in, so I won't keep saying it over and over again, has become a major force in the political scene on both the national level and on the state levels. And it has really succeeded in its mission to educate citizens about economic policy and in mobilizing people as advocates in the whole public policy process. The organization, if we had to kind of just describe it in a couple of sentences, believes in limited government, in free markets on the local, state, and federal levels, and they champion principles of entrepreneurship and fiscal and regulatory restraint, which is kind of music to my ears, to be honest with you. AFP supports cutting taxes and government spending, fighting proposed tax increases, pointing out evidence of government waste, fraud, and abuse, and we're finding out so much of that, and in removing unnecessary barriers to entrepreneurship, as well as restoring fairness to the judicial system. Now, AFP has 2.3 million activists in all 50 states. And these are folks that really are active, calling legislators, writing letters, writing emails, showing up at hearings and such, and really making a difference, telling it like it is. 34 state chapters and affiliates belong to AFP, including a New Hampshire state chapter, which in, I guess, just a little under 4 years, has managed to attract over 29,000 people to participate in the process here in New Hampshire. And I think what's kind of remarkable is the fact that the AFP Foundation has among its supporters over 90,000 ordinary people, just ordinary people who believe in the cause and dig into their wallets to help support it. Now, my guest today is Greg Moore, who this spring took over for Corey Lewandowski as the New Hampshire State Director for AFP. And he's not coming into this as a young innocent by any means. He's a very familiar face and voice in the New Hampshire State House. He previously served as the Chief of Staff for the New Hampshire House of Representatives and worked in that position directly under the Speaker of the House. In that role, he worked on several major issues and helped bring about the largest state budget reduction in the state's history, numerous business tax and fee reductions, the Medicaid managed care law, and tough welfare reform requirements. Prior to that position, he served as the House Policy Director, and prior to that, he served as Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations for the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, and that was during the period when John Stephen served as Commissioner of that humongous department. Greg has also been a staff person on both congressional and gubernatorial campaigns. He's held the positions of Campaign Manager, Communications Director, and Director of Policy and Communications. And on top of all that, he's also served as a private consultant to several corporations. And for many of them, he both developed and directed grassroots advocacy campaigns on important business issues. Greg's a Manchester resident, and as I said, is becoming even more of a familiar face these days. Has a wicked schedule, so I'm so glad he's here.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have a gazillion questions for you, and I'll be watching that clock and hoping we can get them all in.
I appreciate it.
Because I know you have a gazillion answers.
And I appreciate the intro. And I think Americans for Prosperity has really had an opportunity to grow in a little over 4 years, as you mentioned. That
yes.
We've had a New Hampshire chapter, and started to make a greater and greater impact. And you start small and you start to grow, and as you grow, obviously it sort of has a magnifying effect on your ability to influence public policy by having constituents of elected leaders hear from the people they represent, and they begin to hear about the impact of the actual prospective legislation or regulation and what it could have in the community. particularly when it comes to jobs and the economy. And from our perspective, we really focus on trying to enhance and grow economic freedom. So, it's a fantastic opportunity for citizens to get involved and to become educated, as you point out. That's an important component of what we do, as well as to have a direct dialogue with the elected officials to try to make sure that officials, A, are held accountable, and B, more importantly, that they understand what people in the real community hear. Because all too often, and knowing a lot of, particularly in the state legislature, but also up in Washington, a lot of the elected officials wonder what exactly is it that our people think, because a lot of people have people who are paid to contact them, would be it lobbyists or employees of an organization, and they're being directed. But at AFP, our focus is more or less in trying to build up that grassroots, basically real people, Joe Sixpack, and have that person reach out. And I think it's a lot more meaningful when your constituent who doesn't have maybe a financial interest in the outcome of a policy, but it does have a financial interest in having lower taxes and less regulation, because ultimately that does impact them, and it does hit home for them in their wallet.
Well, I think that has been one of the best things of AFP in New Hampshire, because you have gotten so many people who prior to now didn't speak up. And I mean, that's just so important, and that educational aspect of it is so important, because a lot of times people might want to speak up, but they don't feel versed enough on the issue. And it's funny because, you mentioned the education thing, and that actually goes right into the first question I had written down as a potential question, because a major mission of AFP, right in their website and publications and such, is that they want to educate citizens on the important issues and the ramifications of the issues. And one of the ways that I think personally that has been accomplished is the Foundation's publication of these need-to-know educational memos they've done. And as I was kind of going through them, I mean, it was pretty impressive that they're on 66 different subjects, ranging on everything from budget and spending issues to issues dealing with health care, education, labor issues, energy, the environment, property rights, taxes. I mean, the whole potpourri for somebody. It could go in totally ignorant of all the major issues and sit there and take a few days to read those different things and be very well versed.
Or if you're just interested in one issue, you can find it easily and find out the importance of that particular issue that's meaningful maybe to one or two people. But for them, they're not interested in reading. But if you have a broad interest, we certainly welcome people coming to our website. It's americansforprosperity.org, all spelled out. And come and get more information about all these issues. We want people to know the background of the issues before they reach out, so that they're not just saying call your senator and say A, B, and C.
Or sending that form letter that so many reps hate.
Exactly.
When they get 100 of exactly the same.
So when you hear from a caller or get an email from somebody who actually knows the issue, it's so much more moving as an elected official. Say, wait a second, this person really knows what they're talking about. They're not just someone who's been given a form letter, as you mentioned. That's
and that's irritating to a lot of them. I've heard some of them complain that they got 150 exactly the same emails.
More than you can imagine. I can tell you, having worked in that environment, more than you can imagine.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you know what? I'd like to focus on some of the timely issues on both the state and national level. That work for you?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, one that I'm going to bring up first off is something that's on everybody's mind these days, is gasoline prices. In fact, in the news this morning, they were reporting that just in the past week alone, the average increase in the price of gasoline nationwide has been 6 cents per gallon, and that we are a full 20% higher now this summer per gallon price than we were last summer. Now, I know a lot of people, and anybody who's given it any thought really believes that we're just going to keep seeing that escalate unless there's some serious things happen, like progress on the Keystone Pipeline, which of course Obama has fought, excessive regs needing to be rolled back on coal plants, expanded offshore drilling, and then federal lands opened up for natural gas exploration, which of course has been one of those issues too that we've seen politicians slow to take. AFP, where do you stand? What are your positions on this?
Well, first and foremost, AFP believes that the more opportunities on the issue specifically of gasoline is that the more options that we have, the better off we are. We're the all of the above variety, and so we believe that we can do more energy exploration, and that's a plus. Whether it's looking at Keystone, whether it's opening up new opportunities for oil exploration here in America, whether it's working to improve our refinery capacity for the oil that comes from overseas. It'd be great if we could be energy independent, but for example, a lot of the oil that's coming out of Alaska right now ends up going to China and Japan
instead of to here.
Instead of to here, because of the lack of refinery capacity on the West Coast. They just don't have the capacity to turn that petroleum into gasoline over in the West Coast, so it goes on a boat over to China and Japan. And so, for example, opening up more of Alaska certainly would create more opportunities, but if you don't have the refinery capacity in the West Coast, that really doesn't necessarily make the United States less energy independent, because you're just sending more gasoline to China and Japan,
elsewhere.
which ultimately impacts the world market, which it has an impact on prices. But it also has to do with a lot of the regulatory stuff that goes on in terms of the use of some of the other fuels. And what I say is speaking specifically of ethanol. Now, ethanol, there was an interesting op-ed that was in the Wall Street Journal last week, speaking about how, because of some of the federal regulations, the price of ethanol is driving up the cost of gallon of gasoline by about 10 cents a gallon, simply because of the mandates that are going on in Washington, and that's above and beyond the actual cost of the ethanol. This is a regulatory burden beyond the actual cost of the ethanol, and so AFP says, look, that's one more example of how regulation is driving up these costs, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you can find the oil closer, it's probably going to be cheaper. If you don't have to import it from half a world away, it's going to be a lot less expensive. So increasing capacity, reducing regulation, and then here, obviously, one of the things that we focused on over the course of the last legislative session was there was a proposed increase in the gasoline and diesel tax.
Yes, I had that on my list to talk to you about.
Would have increased the tax by 83%. So it would have gone from 18 cents a gallon, and it would have added another 15 cents a gallon onto the 18 cents. So it would have gone from 18 cents up to 33 cents a gallon.
That's a huge hit.
And that's a huge hit in the wallets of the working families here in New Hampshire. I mean, particularly for those folks, I know a lot of folks here in Bedford probably commute to Boston.
A lot do.
And that cost is magnified when you're filling up your tank, and you probably have to fill up your tank at least once and maybe twice a week, and potentially you're looking at another $3 in new taxes every time you fill up your tank. That's a huge hit over the course of a year, and so we worked closely with the state senate, and we were able to defeat that tax. And that doesn't mean that that's the end of the transportation funding issue, because there are still some issues we have to work through.
Yeah, it's another question I have for you too.
But what we're saying, and what we've said is, part of the problem we have is the fact that right now in the existing highway fund, with the 18 cents now, that goes into the highway fund. Only 2/3 of the money that goes into the highway fund is actually used for roads and bridges, and what that means is that 6 cents out of that 18 cents that the New Hampshire citizens are paying right now for their gas is going for non-road and bridge funding operations. So that's a case where we, as an organization, made clear to our membership to reach out to a lot of their legislators and say, look, before we start talking about raising this tax on a substantial amount, let's worry about trying to get all the other groups that are in there siphoning money out of the highway fund to go find other sources.
Stop the diversion.
And what's happening is that in state government, and I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but in state government, if you can find a non-general fund funded source, it becomes a lot easier to guarantee the funding for your program. So everyone's trying to get out of the general fund because that's obviously the first place where things are cut, and number one, and number two, it's also a place where there's constantly competition among dollars. So whenever a group or agency can get themselves out of the general fund, they try to move heaven and earth to do it, and what you end up with is a case where a third of highway fund dollars are not going to build highways or roads.
Well, that kind of plays into one of the questions that I had a little further down on my list, what you were just talking about, because there was a piece of legislation in New Hampshire this year that, quite frankly, got very little media attention, and I think was totally unknown to a lot of residents. And I know I brought it up to a couple of people, and they'd look at me and they'd go, "What?" And that's the bill that would have brought about a 25% tax increase on home heating oil to fund the fuel oil discharge cleanup fund. Now, my understanding is that particular fund really doesn't need any more money. So I guess my question is, talk to us a little bit about that bill. And was that whole thing kind of a backdoor means of putting more money into that fund so that it could be grabbed for other uses?
Right. That was House Bill 185, which was passed by both the House and Senate. Has since been signed into law by the governor. So it's actually,
it is going to take effect.
It's actually taken effect.
So people who heat with oil are going to have a new surprise this year.
The tax, or they call it a fee, but it's on every gallon it just increased by 25%, and at the same time, they also passed another bill to try to deal with some of the problems in the funding in terms of trying to narrow the groups that would be eligible for payments from this fund. So you're putting more money in at the same time you're narrowing the groups of people who can take out. What that is a recipe for is one of these funds that just starts growing over time, and then maybe not next year, but maybe in 2 years or in 4 years, legislature says, "Hey, that fund has a lot of money in it.
There you go.
Let's go grab some money and put that in the general fund."
So it really is kind of a backdoor approach.
So it certainly could be that, and I think what we said is, let's make the changes. If you feel as though the fund is having some ongoing funding problems,
but they're not, correct?
Well,
as such, I mean,
it's in surplus, but the surplus is declining.
Well, yeah.
But they didn't just pass the tax increase. They also passed a bill to limit where those funds could go.
Okay.
So what we said is, let's pass that first, and then if the fund still has problems, then maybe you can come back and have a conversation about the funds going in. But don't do both at the same time.
Let me ask you, were there a lot of homeowners show up for those hearings? Because it was not one of those bills that really captured a lot of public attention.
AFP was one of the few organizations that was there and had members there. It really was kind of...
I mean, I don't have oil heat, but I know a lot of people who do, and they were screaming this year over what it was costing them to heat their homes.
It was a significant issue. There were several AFP members, people who are part of our organization, who came and just came and decided to take time out of their day to show up and testify.
I don't
but
doubt
really, that was it. We didn't hear from many other groups. Meanwhile, the State Department of Environmental Services had a whole host of folks there talking about the calamities that would have happened if this bill weren't passed. The
state would fall right off the
we might just exactly would have gone into the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think the legislature was responsive to some of those concerns that DES raised. I thought, from our perspective, we thought that the impact to the homeowner wasn't quite fully taken in a way that it's going to be impacting them over the course of the years. And
do you think the reason that kind of was quiet on that particular bill is just because there were so many big ones that people were paying attention to?
Absolutely. When people are focusing their time and energy on gas and diesel tax, home heating oil probably doesn't seem as important. First of all, because pretty much everybody uses gas and diesel, whereas a smaller group uses home heating oil. And I think that moreover, I think that you've also got a situation in which the actual impact over the course of a year was going to be a lot smaller on the home heating oil, the average homeowner who uses heating oil versus the person who fills up, like I said, the person who commutes.
Yeah,
they're going to feel that. They would have felt the hit of that quite rapidly.
Every time they get a home oil delivery, they'll see that little bump too.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that
And there'll be folks that's going to be tough for.
The oil
I mean, who are
companies,
like right on the line
well,
now budgeting.
We have obviously the LIHEAP program is already overbooked in terms of the number of people who are making requests for help
Really?
from the federal government, these federal funds which are run through the state, and so because you've already got a problem there, you know that there are people who are on edge, as you point out, and so what it means is that that person who maybe senior citizen who is keeping their home at 60 degrees is going to now keep their home at 58,
and there are people doing that.
And that's just, and I mean that's the real human impact.
I know.
I mean,
and I mean, we had a cold winter this year too.
Right. We talk dollars and cents, and sometimes we need to put it right in terms of how people can respond to that and see the impact. And if, like I said, if there's a senior who would normally keep their home at 60, which is still pretty chilly, and now has to keep it at 68, then there can be a significant impact in their lives.
Well, I actually know people who this year, and I mean this is not a fib, I do know people who this year were trying to squeak out as much as they could out of that last tank they had filled, and when the cold weather kept coming, I mean, we're at certain times of day turning the heat off totally, trying to reserve that last tank so they wouldn't have to have yet another delivery because, you know, money was that tight.
No, I know. I remember Memorial Day weekend we had snow in Concord.
Yeah.
And maybe didn't quite make it this far
Yeah, we didn't have
down.
a great spring this year, that's for sure.
But up in Concord and north in the town of Franklin, they had 5 to 6 inches of snow. So we had a really, I mean, we don't think about it now because it's 98 degrees outside. But we had a really cold winter this past winter.
And we could have another one.
Right, absolutely so.
But yeah, that bill kind of amazed me. And as I said, during the session, I had mentioned it to a few people, and they'd look at me like, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about this.
Well, we certainly worked hard at AFP to try to bring
I know
some
AFP
attention.
did, yeah. But for some reason, the media just did not cover that one, though.
I think you're right. I think you're right. The gas and diesel really harness the focus of their energies, and it's unfortunate because, like I said, there will be a human impact to it.
Of course. Well, we would have to talk about this, both on the state and national level. The battles over Obamacare certainly continue nationwide and here in New Hampshire, particularly the components of it, dealing with things like the Medicaid expansion, Medicaid funding, healthcare exchanges, yada, yada, yada. Now, I don't know how accurate this is, but we've been told that Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire could lead to 50 to 60,000 new people, many of whom will be giving up health insurance that they already have. I believe that I heard you speak somewhere and say that New Hampshire taxpayers will wind up paying, with those kind of numbers, like $188 million per year for that. We all know there's a study commission looking at it. Who knows which way it's going to go. What does, I mean, both, obviously we're looking at it on the two levels, the national and the state. Where's your organization on this? What do you think has to happen?
Well, it's not just our organization who obviously
I know that.
not opposed, but just from my personal experience, having worked in health and human services and worked in
so you're adding that perspective to it as well.
And I can tell you, first of all, I guess we'll start at the federal level because that's where a lot of the activity is going on. At the federal level, we just sort of see this, I guess what could be described as a Franken-bill. And it was a case where President Obama in his first term sort of outsourced the passage of this bill to the House and the Senate. And for those folks who want to see everything that's wrong in Washington, this is a good example. Instead of worrying about, let's put together a cohesive plan as to what's going to impact the lives and benefit the citizens of America, it sort of became a case of, well, what does this senator want? And that and that congressman wants this, and this senator needs that. And so you end up with this sort of unholy brew of policy that doesn't quite work together. And I think we're starting to see that. And it's like, as I tell people, it's sort of like asking Frankenstein's monster to jump out of bed and start singing Fred Astaire, and it's just not going to happen. And I think what the impact of that in real terms, in terms of real people's health care, is going to be significant. I guess the first place we should start is Medicare, because there are a lot of seniors out there, and they're concerned because as they've probably heard, there's over $700 billion in reductions to the Medicare program. Now, there's no one's arguing the fact that the Medicare program has a lot of problems. A lot of problems
Yeah,
in the
it
long
does.
run.
Yeah.
And it needs to have reform. But the reform shouldn't simply have been, well, let's just try to make reductions. We think there should have been some more wholesale reform to the program in terms of ways of providing care, but maybe doing it in a way such that you're still able to get all the pieces, but maybe you have to move into, say, managed care or some other situation like that. Something similar to like a Medicare Advantage program for everybody.
And wouldn't prescriptions and
Right,
things like that
right.
all
That would all be
factor
covered.
into that too, right?
That would all be covered, but you know, there'd be some elements that would need to be worked out, and there are a number of proposals out there, and we think that all those proposals are worth listening to. But to simply say that we're going to come along and give a haircut to these programs is problematic in the sense that if you see what's happening in the Medicaid program, where what they do is they just reduce rates. If we start to see that in Medicare, you'll start to see some of the problems that are already existing in Medicaid, which is the health care for the poor and disabled, where there are doctors who refuse to take Medicaid patients. Hospitals are just trying to move people out as soon as they can.
Health outcomes
Health outcomes are dramatically lower in terms of Medicaid versus Medicare.
That's what I thought.
Even though obviously you're not dealing necessarily with the healthiest population in Medicare, because many seniors obviously are starting to the point where you need a lot more health care in your life than you do when you're much younger, and yet Medicaid still tends to have worse health outcomes than Medicare. And so there's some great concern about not just the long-term funding with Medicare, but how are you going to continue to maintain a level of quality? And so that's the first problem with Obamacare. The second problem is the pieces aren't working. We saw that the Class Act, which was the long-term care insurance, that's not going to happen. That had to be pulled out of the program. The co-ops, that the sort of the funding for the high-risk pools, that had to be stopped because it ran out of money. We saw that the employer mandate, which was supposed to go into effect in January of next year, that's been pushed off for at least a year. At the actual exchanges, there was supposed to be competition. There was supposed to be this real opportunity to drive down prices through competition. Well, now the exchanges are only going to get one healthcare insurer in the exchange for at least the first year. And so all throughout the process, all the promises that were made by Obamacare are not coming true, and they're being broken one at a time. And as that trickles down to the state level, you have a state senate which said, where the federal government is saying, take our word for it. We're good for this.
That is so scary.
Nothing else in Obamacare has worked, but this part we promise is going to work well. And so I think that the state senate said, wait a second, we don't necessarily want that. In large part because according to the Lewin Group, which is the group that was commissioned by Health and Human Services to look into the issue, they say that their estimate is that the take-up will be 58,000 new people on Medicaid. But only 22,000 of those, a little over 22,000, would be people who are currently uninsured. That means that almost 36,000 people are people who already have health insurance, whose company is going to say, hey, look, you can get health care for free, off you go. And particularly now that the employer mandate's been pulled away, I actually think that number is low. And so you're going to see tens of thousands of people, if Medicaid is expanded, tens of thousands of people with high-quality health insurance get dumped into a low-quality, substandard Medicaid program. And as a public policy question, we need to ask ourselves, wait a second, why are we doing something that's actually making the lives worse for tens of thousands of people?
Not to mention the cost.
Right, and they say, well, the program's paid in full by the federal government for the first 3 years, as if first of all.
Well, where does the federal government money come from? That comes from us too.
As if federal taxpayers aren't, state taxpayers aren't also federal taxpayers. But secondarily, the House, the U.S. House of Representatives has already said that they're going to defund. In the House budget, they defunded Obamacare. They defunded Medicaid expansion. The president, in his budget, moved away from this guaranteed match rate to a lower match rate, blended rate as they called it. And so you've got the House and the president already saying, well, wait a second, we're not going to live up to our promises. And again, one more broken promise.
But they want us to believe in New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
We're good to go.
And so what I tell people about Medicaid expansion in particular is, it's like telling people who don't have a car that we're going to give you a 1979 Ford Pinto with 250,000 miles on it. So it might work, it might not. It might start today,
Maybe,
it might
huh?
not. So you have a low quality vehicle, and that might not be so bad for somebody who doesn't have a car.
Yeah.
Because suddenly you have a car.
Yeah.
But for people who currently have health insurance, it's like saying we're going to take away your late model Honda Civic
there
and
you
give
go.
you
Yeah,
too a
yeah,
1979 Ford Pinto with 250,000 miles on it. And so
What a deal.
yeah, exactly. For those people, you're not going to be able to keep your doctor. You're going to get shifted to a lower quality care. And I think that it's a good reason why the state senate should take a step back and say, this is not the right time. Let's see about the problems that other states have before we even consider going down this pathway. And I think that they've made the right decision, and hopefully, I know that Senator Andy Sanborn,
Yes, yeah, he's on that
from
committee,
here in
yeah.
Bedford, serves on that commission. I know
Yes.
he has some significant concerns,
Yes, he
and I
does.
think appropriately significant concerns. And I think he's doing a good job of articulating those concerns every chance he gets.
Yes, he has been very, very public and vocal. Again, and there's so many different topics I want to cover with you because I know you have a lot to say. Educational issues, obviously, are always hot button issues, and I know that your organization has been active on the state and national level on that. Now, recently, at least two have gotten a lot of attention here in New Hampshire as well, and we've done shows on them, and both are still ongoing. One of them is the federally initiated Common Core Educational Standards, which New Hampshire has signed onto and is scheduled for full implementation for the 2014-15 school year. The second is the Business Tax Credit Scholarship Program, which is probably going to wind up before the New Hampshire Supreme Court before that's done.
Oh,
So,
it's definitely going
talk
there.
about that.
Well, for those folks who haven't been following the Education Choice Tax Credit issue,
In this town, it has become a real hot button.
in a Stratford County Superior Court judge, Judge Lewis, this is the same judge that threw out the state law that said that you don't have to be a resident to vote
Yeah.
in towns.
Yeah, he's kind of a piece of work, I think.
Well,
is a
I
good way
mean,
to describe him.
one could argue. One could argue if lawyers are looking to get on his docket, if you're looking to challenge a right of center free market
Yeah, really.
conservative legislation, at least that seems to be the pathway at this point. But the Education Choice Tax Credit is a major issue.
Yes.
And what this judge said was, the Education Choice Tax Credits can go forward, but that they cannot benefit, the tax credits cannot benefit people going to religious schools. The problem there is that money never comes to the government. So it's not the government's money.
Exactly.
It is a private company
Exactly.
giving money to an organization that is in turn, a private organization, a nonprofit organization, that is in turn giving scholarships to parents. And what the law says is that that company can take a tax credit for the funds that it gives to that organization, that nonprofit organization.
Yet
And
the people who argue against it would make it sound like it's coming straight out of the state coffers.
The people who argue make the argument that it's costing money, but I don't know what the basis of that is, because that money was never in.
Exactly.
And their argument is, well, that money would have but for, and that's,
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
but as they say in the law, possession is 9/10 the
That's
law.
right.
But that money has never been possessed by the state, and it's making a rather slippery slope argument, saying that all money could publicly be public money, and you're only allowed to keep that which the state allows you to keep, and that's a very, very scary pathway that they're going down.
I agree with you.
And ultimately, what our organization is focused on is saying, making sure that the Supreme Court hears the basis for the law, and then just applies basic common sense legal principles. I mean, the legal principle that all money ultimately could be taxpayer money, so therefore you can't do anything with it. It also begs a question of, what about tax breaks, property tax breaks, the communities give to churches. How could, if that money would have gone into the state's the town's coffers, would it then not make it unconstitutional for towns to offer tax exemptions to churches and synagogues and other places of worship? So it's a number of serious concerns are raised with that Supreme Court decision, and it is going to the Supreme Court. Hopefully the Supreme Court will say, look, this decision makes no sense whatsoever. It just can't make sense. First of all, it's fighting over 200 years of case law, and more importantly, it ultimately arrives at more of a political decision than it arrives at a decision of law. And I don't know how that ruling can stand in its current phase. But again, the bigger issue, it comes down, there are real people who are injured by this ruling, and that is people who perhaps you have an opportunity for scholarship. There isn't a private school in your area, but there might be a Catholic school.
That's right.
So it might be the only non-public option you might have might be a Catholic or other religious school.
That's right.
And so to deny that religious school an opportunity is to deny that family school choice, and at times force a child to stay in a school where that child might be failing.
Yeah.
And that's a really disappointing scenario. And I hope that your viewers certainly stay involved and engaged in this issue, because I think that there are some very serious principles that were raised by that Supreme Court.
Well, as I said here, we've done shows on it, and as far as I'm concerned, we'll keep doing shows on it until it's settled.
It is a huge issue, Kathy, and I think it's critical for you to stay on top of it, because where that ruling could take us is a very dangerous place.
I agree with you. Before I ask you the next question, you've probably heard some noise in the background. There's obviously something else going on in the building, and I'm really hoping that our audio is not picking it up so that our viewers aren't listening to it as well. And I noticed that somebody left the studio door open, so I'm kind of hoping that very quickly somebody realizes the studio door is open and will come in close. And sorry for that, but
no
I want to make sure you don't get drowned out.
No worries.
You know, last year I had a whole series of interviews with candidates, and one of the candidates that obviously I interviewed was Maggie Hassan when she was running for governor. And she spoke at length about her leadership role while she was a state legislator in getting the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative passed. And of course, we all know our GGI, or a lot of people like to call it RGGI. A lot of people call it a failed cap and trade scheme. This year, there was a legislative effort to repeal it. I know that AFP was active. Want to talk about that?
Unfortunately, the repeal effort didn't work out as well as we would have liked. In fact, it went just the opposite way and actually strengthened RGGI from. So a bill that came in as a bill to repeal RGGI ultimately is a bill that made RGGI stronger, which sometimes might demonstrate to your viewers how the legislative process can go in a radical way, differently from how it had been initially intended. RGGI is a cap and trade program. It's failed because the auctions, and if you know anything about supply and demand, in order to sell something, you have to have a buyer, and the RGGI auctions have failed because they haven't had buyers, and the prices remain stuck at the floor level, and people have been buying credits at that floor level simply because there's just not enough of a demand to warrant all the supply that's there. So the solution for the people who run this cap and trade scheme is, well, let's just artificially just get rid of demand. Artificially just get rid of supply. Now that'll boost up demand.
Yeah, really.
And what that means to the average consumer is another increase, a 30% increase in the hit that people take.
It is that high? 30%?
Well, no, not 30% in the amount they were paying. They're paying 30% more on top of that. It's actually going up from 43 cents a month to the average residential consumer to 56 cents a month. And while that might not seem a lot to the average person, obviously when it goes all across the state of New Hampshire, it picks up millions of dollars worth of money that's then redistributed for what we like to call green pork. In other words, it's subsidizing green energy
So kind of here we go again.
that cannot stand up on its own. If it could have stood up on its own, it wouldn't need to be subsidized.
Subsidized, exactly.
So what we're trying to do is we're saying that well, you know what? This stuff is so good, we're going to create a market for it, even though no market should normally exist. And I think just as like they've created a marketplace to sell Reggie credits when no market, they just created something out of thin air. That's not free market.
No,
you can't just create marketplaces because via government regulation and say, hey, we're free market here. It's actually a case where you're twisting the free market because you're making the other programs more expensive and you're reducing the role of competition. And that's really creating a problem over the course of how these states all have to tweak their policy because their idea to create a marketplace is failing. And that's because marketplaces aren't created. They take place on their own.
Yeah.
And individuals making decisions in their own best interest is what's called a free marketplace. It's not something where government comes in and puts their foot down and says, this is your market. So what AFP is said is, look, the Reggie program's not working. Get New Hampshire out of this program that's not working. Allow people to have their money back and allow us not to continue to subsidize these unproductive, unreliable energy sources that we call green pork.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Because it was brought up in 2013, it would not be able to be brought up in 2014, correct?
Well, I think that as a more pragmatic matter, there aren't the votes right now to repeal Reggie.
Do you think by 2015 session?
It's possible, but I just...
I mean, the fight's not going to be over, is it? Just because of what happened this year?
No, considering the makeup of the legislature, it's going to take another election.
It will?
It will.
Yeah.
We're just not going to be able to make that transition.
I mean, I know the governor obviously likes it because she...
Well,
she's a candidate.
She's a big fan of subsidizing unreliable energy sources.
Well, let's hope it does come up again. Now, here's a question for you, and I have a feeling you'll have lots of good answers on this one. All of us are told, and we've heard it over and over again, particularly from different sources, that New Hampshire departments and agencies have been forced to operate leaner and meaner, particularly with regard to greatly reduced staff numbers. Yet, in the news lately, just in the past few days, all of us got to read the charming story about the New Hampshire Department of Education hiring a very high-priced consultant at a fee way higher than that same person was earning as a state employee for a consulting position on top of that wasn't even advertised. Now, we only learned about this, I think, the newspapers picked it up because of the fact that it came up at the governor's executive council meeting, and Chris Sununu had a great deal to say about that. Well, as part of all that, I've been reading a lot of articles and such telling us that this consulting stuff is a pretty good routine practice across the board in New Hampshire government, which kind of defies this leaner and meaner government, doesn't it? So, given all of this, I mean, and that's just one little piece, do you think, I mean, it's reasonable for us to believe that government waste and overspending in New Hampshire has really been addressed?
Leadership matters. It really does.
Yeah, it does.
I had an opportunity to work for John Stephen, who was Commissioner of Health and Human Services.
I thought he did an excellent job as commissioner, and he took a fair amount of criticism.
And he took over the largest state agency.
Yes, he did.
And he made his metric for success. And I think this is really where it comes down. Every single department head needs to pick a metric, which is what's important to them. How are they going to define success for themselves? Because there isn't some global success indicators when you're running an agency like that. Obviously, meeting your mandates and delivering services that you're constitutionally and statutorily required to do is an important component. But within the actual operation and management, you need to lay out your success. And that goes to the governor as well. The governor needs to have metrics that he or she will use to determine how successful they're doing and their employees are doing for them. Commissioner Stephen or then Commissioner Stephen, made his metric for success at the end of the year, how much money was he returning back to the state that had been appropriated to him. So
that would certainly be a different point of view from most.
And it was definitely a different perspective from within a state agency, and particularly the Department of Health and Human Services, which had, prior to his administration, had historically come back to the legislature towards the end of budgets and said, we need more money. We've overspent our budget. You need to give us more money. And so,
if they didn't get it, there'd be a lot of weeping and wailing. How?
No, we're just going to stop paying people.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, we're out of money. We can't pay you.
Not to mention all the poor people who are going to suffer in New Hampshire.
Well, but I mean, the providers would still provide the services; they just wouldn't get paid for it. And then what they do is they just unleash all those providers to go yell at the legislature. We need you to give them more money so we can get paid. So that really was a way that you could do it. And once that culture starts spreading, that is the thing, and that every single decision, the people who work underneath them is going to be looked at through that lens and given that scrutiny. It really changes how people administrate their programs.
Let me ask you this now: since he left as commissioner, have his replacement? I don't know how many. There have been one or two replacements.
Just one. Commissioner Tumpus.
Has he gone along with that, or has it gone back to normal?
Maybe,
and I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't ask you that question because I don't want to put you in a bad position.
No, listen, I'm here to tell the truth, right? Commissioner Tumpus was Commissioner Stevens' deputy commissioner.
Oh, okay.
So he came out of that culture.
He had some of the beliefs. Right?
And so I think that we have not seen the department coming back asking for money.
Good.
In terms of how much money has come back each year, in terms of how much was returned, there aren't great amounts of data sources to collect that. That's something that's probably something we should look at, so we can start tracking administrators' performances. And it's something certainly that the governor hopefully is doing. I think Governor Lynch really put some effort into it. Governor Benson put a ton of effort into it. Governor Lynch put some effort into it. It remains to be seen yet as to how much effort Governor Hassan's putting into that. And so, but I think that culturally, that's really where it matters. And there are a lot of department heads who look at their role as being to the benefit of the people who they serve. And some people don't balance that to the benefit of the taxpayers.
Right.
And when if you're at Health and Human Services and you say, how can I make sure that I'm helping
that's the biggest state
agency, by far and away the largest state agency. And just saying, if you're saying, how do I help the citizens who are receiving benefits, and you're not asking, on the other hand, how do I benefit the taxpayers who are paying the bills? And I'm not picking on DHHS.
No, I know.
It could be any agency. And if you're in the Department of Education, say, how do I help school districts, and not considering how do I benefit the taxpayers as well. And I think it's incumbent upon the governor and the executive council to make sure that balance is restored, and that's what they're there for. And so,
I was happy to hear that Sununu asked those kind of questions.
Councillor Sununu was asking exactly. He's doing his job. He's doing a great job in terms of making sure that these agencies are being held accountable, and that the taxpayer is brought back into the equation. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have an executive council here in New Hampshire. A lot of people scratch their heads in other states. They say, "What is this crazy?" 5-person super senate you have over there in the legislature.
But they can ask the right questions.
But again, we don't trust our governors in New Hampshire, and that's dating back into the 18th century. We've never trusted governors here in New Hampshire. And so we said, okay, we're going to give you some power, Governor, but we're going to put these 5 people around you to make sure that you and the other state agencies that you run are having their feet held to the fire.
Well, because I mean, when you learn things like this, it's infuriating, and to learn that people can leave a job or retire from a job in state service and be kind of getting their state pension, which that's fine, they worked for it.
It happens all the time.
But then be double dipping by getting an even bigger amount of money than they were earning by serving as a consultant. I mean, that's just plain insulting to us as taxpayers.
Ironically, it happens
I'm sorry.
very frequently in public safety.
It's insulting to us.
It is, and it happens a lot at the public safety level.
I know it has,
In the
yes.
town level,
I
where a police officer will
know.
retire and then they'll suddenly show up
Yeah, I know.
working in another police department. So they're collecting their retirement from the first police department at the same time.
That it infuriates me.
And I think
Maybe
that,
there's something wrong with me, but
no,
you know,
no, I think that
it
when you say you're
infuriates me.
retired and you're collecting your pension, people retire because they can't work anymore.
Well, what's even worse, though, is it's one thing to retire from your public position and take your public pension and go
Work in
get
the
a
private
job
sector.
at Home Depot,
Right.
you know, for a few extra bucks so you can, you know, go out to eat every night or something. But it's a whole other thing when you just move over into yet another
you're doing
public
the
payroll that
same
I'm
job.
paying for, damn it, you know?
Yeah, right. And you're doing the same job.
Exactly, exactly.
And you're absolutely right. There's no reason why.
Stuff like that drives me nuts. You know, maybe nobody out there agrees with me,
No,
but stuff like that just
basic
sets me off.
accountability, Kathy. I agree with you. It's critical. It has to happen throughout state government, has to happen throughout the federal government, and it even has to happen at the local government level. One of the things that we're working on at AFP has to do with the local government center. A lot of towns
Yes.
across New Hampshire,
Yes.
and a lot of
The
school districts
overpayments and everything. Yes,
Pay-
Bedford School District is getting a chunk
overpaid
back.
for
Yes.
years into these health and
Yes.
workers' compensation programs. For years, they overpaid into them,
Yes.
overcharged.
Yep.
And now a mediator came along and said, LGC, you have to pay people back the amount that you overcharge them. You have to give them their money back. And what we're doing
How
is...
sad for LGC, huh?
Well, you know,
Life is hard.
but I'll say that, unfortunately, they put a lot of money into buying a lot of buildings, and as we like to call it, an edifice complex.
Oh, wonderful.
And instead, they should have been more worried about providing the lowest quality,
Yeah,
the highest quality services, the lowest cost.
Yeah, really.
And so what we're doing is we're telling our members, look, reach out to your local elected officials. If it's your town, reach out to your selectmen. If it's your school, if it's your school department or your school district, reach out to
our
your
school board.
talk to your school board,
administrators, yeah.
and demand that money comes back to the taxpayers.
Yep.
Because in a lot of these towns, if that
They're gonna
money
use
comes
it for
back,
something else.
they're going to use it to grow
Manna
grow
from
government.
heaven, woohoo!
Right.
You know,
Found
money.
And you need to make sure
Burn
that
a
money,
hole in the pocket.
and whether it comes back in a check
Yep.
to the taxpayer, or whether it comes back in a one-time low reduced property tax payment.
I totally agree.
Either way, that money should come back to the citizens who paid it and overpaid it.
I totally agree.
So that's one of the things we're working on at the local level to ensure accountability at AFP.
I like that.
Well, thank you.
See, that's why we get along. We think alike
Absolutely,
on a lot
accountability
of
is
things here,
important, and unfortunately, there aren't enough people who are really focusing on making sure that their officials are being accountable, and so we're working at that hard.
Well, you know, another issue that is hot here because of where we're located in Bedford, and is hot for a lot of people in a lot of other places, probably not up north or what have you, on the seacoast, except for the fact that have to help pay for it, is commuter rail. And we've also done shows on that, both sides of it, the people who want it and the people who go, what are you kidding me? And of course, as we all know, they're spending yet a big chunk of money to study it some more. Has AFP taken a position on whether or not to expand commuter rail in here?
Our position is very simple, and that is any commuter rail project should have to pay for itself.
And it's not going to happen.
Well, I mean,
we know that.
Let's do the study.
It's
I don't
not
want to.
gonna
I don't want to bias the
It'll
study.
never pay for itself.
But I think you're
Not one in the
probably
whole country
right.
pays for
But
itself.
we'll see. And but
You're going to remain an optimist. Huh?
well, we'll wait. When that study comes out, then we'll take a more
We'll
clear
do another
position based
show.
upon data. We'll wait till we see the data. So, these we should not be asking everybody around to subsidize those costs. When you go and drive on a highway, you're paying your taxes when you fill up
Yes.
your gas tank.
Yes.
That's paying your taxes to subsidize, if you will.
Yes.
But it's a user fee.
And you're paying motor vehicle taxes.
Absolutely, you pay
you're
motor
getting hit
vehicle fees.
tolls. I mean, you're getting hit every which way.
Absolutely, absolutely. But to turn around and then to say, look, we understand that this is going to run at a loss, and not just a little loss, probably
a big loss.
Probably an 8-figure-a-year loss.
Yes.
I've heard numbers as high as $40 million
Yes, there's
a
no
year.
way tickets can pay for it.
And
no way.
why would we ask the average citizen If it's $40 million a year and there's 1.3 million citizens in the state, you're asking people to pay $30 a year. The people in Berlin who are struggling to get by now suddenly have to pay. Now I don't know how the tax would be structured or the fee would be structured, but to ask people to pay that type of a hit is a huge imposition. That's $120 for a family of 4.
And there is not a single one in the entire country that pays for itself.
And
they've always operated at a huge deficit.
And so, what is the major benefit? I mean, do we really want to make it that easy for people to jump on a train to go to leave the state to go work in some other other town?
True.
So I understand the people who would benefit. Look at this as being a fantastic opportunity. But for those people who don't have a direct financial benefit...
Well, I mean, it would be one of those fun things if we had all kinds of money.
When was the last time that happened?
Yeah, exactly.
When was the state just had tons of money lying around and didn't have anything to do with it?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you had taken a formal... Believe it or not, look at this. We're into our last couple of minutes here. So I'm going to... If there's something... I guess what I'll do is say to you, if there's some burning thing you want to get across to somebody, now would be the time to do it before we close out. And I do want to mention that your organization is having a national summit in Orlando, Florida on August 30 and 31st.
Absolutely.
If somebody out there watching wanted to go to that, can they?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic opportunity for people to go and listen to a number of fantastic speakers. It's called the Defending the American Dream Summit. Governor Bobby Jindal, Senator Ted Cruz.
He's great. I saw him speak during the election cycle.
Absolutely.
What a speaker.
Michelle Malkin, Senator Marco Rubio. A number of
a lot of big people.
A number of outstanding speakers. Well, it's in Florida, so Senator Rubio didn't have to come too far.
And Orlando.
Right.
Bring the family.
Well,
to Disney
I think
World
he's from the Miami area, but still, you're right. Maybe it's going to be in Universal Studios Orlando.
Oh, neat.
There's lots of information on our website, which is Americans for Prosperity.
So anybody can go?
Absolutely, anybody can go. It's a great opportunity to come, and not just to hear a lot of big name speakers come and talk, and potentially some people we might see up here in New Hampshire, in perhaps a little over a year. Yeah. But it's also a great opportunity in terms of helping people understand how to be more active and be more an effective advocate. To get involved at the community level.
Oh, the learning opportunity is huge.
And it's also being run concurrent with another program called Right Online. And that's really, it's kind of a bloggers conference, but there are a number of big name bloggers who are going to be attending that as well. And for the full list, I'd ask people to go onto the website and check it out. But the two events are going concurrently. They're at Universal Studios. It's the last week of August. Take a look at it. It's a fantastic opportunity to learn.
Hey, if they're handing out any media trips, kind of keep your friend Kathy in mind, will you?
Absolutely. But I would also say that from our perspective, just in terms of making sure people get involved and stay involved, I'd ask people to come and sign up to get on our email list.
Yes.
As
yes,
you're probably
and we will
aware,
put all that on the screen too.
Well,
so
but I want to remind people
that
that's really the way that we get information out to people, and we don't go too crazy. We send 1 or maybe 2 emails a week. We're not going to overload your inbox.
And you do run some events in New Hampshire too.
Absolutely,
which are neat.
absolutely. We do have one. Unfortunately, it's sold out now. But
yes, and by the time this airs, it'll actually be over, which is why I didn't mention it.
But we're having just having a discussion for.
I signed up.
Oh, well,
I made it in before the door closed.
Thrilled to have you, Kathy. And so we do events. We're going to be spending some time over the course of the summer working on healthcare accountability, making sure that people are going to making sure down at Obamacare, our federal officials are going to be held accountable for the implementation of this disastrous program. So I think that's really where we're headed.
I can't believe the time went by so fast. I definitely want you back on again because there's so many issues that we can talk about.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have it.
Well, then we will set up a regular schedule and have you keep coming in and keep telling us about stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. Well, I don't have any time to close. I hope you really enjoyed the show. I hope you got to know Greg, and I hope you got to learn a lot more about what's going on in the state and national level. This was definitely a Tell It Like It Is show, which is what we are all about. I want to thank you for watching. I want you to keep following us. And until next time, bye-bye.